Welcome, everybody, to episode 3 of Breaking the Blueprint with me, Vinay Parmar, and my co-host,
Iqbal Javaid. Glad to be here today.
Yeah. And there's more than 2 of us here today, and we'll reveal who the mystery person in the corner is in a second. But just a quick hello to everybody. Iqbal, what have you been up to since we last got together? What's been happening in your world?
Oh, it feels like it's been forever, isn't it? Like since the last one we've done. So it's lot's been going on. The weather's been crazy.
Yeah.
It's been getting hot and cold. So that's not been too good. But outside of that, it's been an interesting few weeks. Working with lots of organizations around CX. How about yourself?
Yeah, I've seen your LinkedIn. You've been busy. I also had weather experiences, but mine was kind of self-inflicted. You know, I came to 30-degree heat in Dubai, came back, landed in 6-degree heat. That was what a shock to the system that was coming back from that. So I'd been out there for a couple of weeks, and I'll share more about that in future episodes. And again, busy couple of weeks. Yesterday I was doing a keynote for Cisco at their innovation tour. Maybe I'm the guy on this podcast that always has the technology fails, right? You know, you being the technologist, it would make sense if you had them. So yesterday, there I am, I've set my camera up and got it all ready to record because I didn't have a video guy. So I just wanted to record some material for my own purposes. Set the camera up, tested it, had a little remote mic, all the sound was working. And as they announced me on, I hit the record button, went up, did 45 minutes. It was brilliant, got really great feedback. The senior vice president standing on stage saying he was a brilliant keynote. Went back to check the footage. I'd only recorded it in bloody time lapse.
I'll tell you what, and for that reason, I've kept you away from the tech today because I want to make sure this podcast gets recorded. So look, I feel for you.
But that is not my worst epic tech fail. I'll share a very quick one. So my wife's a beautician, right? And we shared a calendar, and she used to put all her appointments in the calendar. And this is before I was an employee, so I was using my own device at work, and I was at National Express. I was in the boardroom. I'm presenting to the exec and the CEO sitting in the room, and halfway through the presentation, up pops a calendar invite, bikini wax, 12 o'clock. Try explaining that to your CEO. Anyway, we could go on for hours. So shall we reveal who the special person in this room is? So this is Matt Garner, who's our very first guest on the podcast. Matt is the founder of Ethos Farm.
Yep, co-founder of Ethos Farm.
Matt and I met, many years ago, and he's been doing some amazing stuff. Matt, over to you. Give us an introduction. What do you tell the people who are listening, watching, what do you do, and a bit about yourself?
Yeah, no problem at all. Well, look, thanks both for having me on and having me the first guest on the podcast. So I'm kind of super lucky and super privileged to be here. So thank you very much for having me on. As Vinay says, I'm a co-founder of Ethos Farm. We set the company up, about 8 years ago now, really focusing on customer and employee experience. And so there's a very long version, which will take me about an hour to explain, but I'll do it the short version for all of your listeners. But we really have 4 verticals to our business. We have a CX consultancy. So we work with brands across the world to design, build, and deliver customer experience strategies and employee experience strategies, being really clear about your vision, what you want your service standards to be, and then importantly, how do you bring that to life? Because it's all well and good having a shiny document, but unless you can bring it to life, then it's not really going to go anywhere. So we've got a CX division. We have a learning and development division where we can design in-house, we can design, build, and deliver any kind of training for your frontline teams to make them the best versions of themselves. Importantly, our third division, which I'll talk about quite a bit today, is all around people solutions. So in-house, we recruit, train, and manage guest experience ambassadors for multiple brands internationally. So we do that for brands like Westwood Shopping Centres, Battersea Power Station, Heathrow Airport, LaGuardia Terminal B, which has just been rated as one of the best airports or best airport terminals in the world. And so there we have real experience of building the rosters, ensuring our people are in the right place at the right time, that they've got the right technology. And that's hugely important to some of the conversation that I'm going to be talking to you about today. And then our fourth division is all around data. So we now have a data team that everyone's got a thirst for data at the moment. And we now have an in-house data team that are building a platform allowing us to gather insights for our clients that they've never been able to see before, so that they can continuously improve their CX journey. So 4 divisions: CX consultancy, L&D, staffing solutions, and data. That's what we are. We're now the 12th fastest growing company in the UK on the Sunday Times 100. And to say it's been a crazy ride, especially when you throw COVID into all of that as well, is an understatement. So we've had good times, we've had bad times, and we're in a pretty good place now.
Now a special mention for the sponsor of this podcast, Novavox. If you're looking to empower your generative AI with your data and your intents, Novavox can help deliver end-to-end contextual services by integrating your applications with generative AI. This will help you deliver personalized support and natural interactions tailored to your customers' needs. Essentially, Novavox represents the glue between your applications, data, and AI. Now, if you're interested in learning more, get in touch directly or contact us via our website, evolved.cx.
And I think we first connected, I think it was on People. I think you were doing a project with Bacardi, if I remember right. It was one of those brands. It was one of the Diageo brands, I think. Maybe.
Yeah. In the early days, we still do a lot of work with travel retail, and we've supported those Bacardi, across learning and development, people solutions, and from a digital perspective as well. So,
Awesome.
So what's great about what we do is that we're not wedded to one industry. So, and then we can cross-fertilize best practice from multiple different industries, see what's working well in travel retail or in high street retail, and then look at aviation and look at how we can improve there. And I think that's the real value add that kind of we bring to a lot of our clients, if they want to understand what good looks like elsewhere, and then factor that into their thinking.
Yeah, ultimately, look, as consumers, whether we're traveling or going to a retail store, we behave the same way. So I think you can take a lot from those learnings. I think this is why for today's topic, it's been good to have you with that experience coming here, talking to us about the physical customer experience. In the last couple of episodes, we've talked about digital experiences, AI. But I think what's particularly post-pandemic, a lot's changed around the physical experience. And we'd like to kind of touch on how do we bring these two worlds together, the physical and digital together? And why is that so important today? What are you experiencing, particularly around airports? I mean, I love a story. There's so many stories to tell around airports themselves, right? But sometimes I can't understand the rationale behind the decisions that they make, or when it comes to taking you down a particular journey within an airport. So I would love to hear more from you around, how you're helping the likes of airports.
Yeah. Look forward to it.
Yeah. So look, I mean, physical experiences, or phygital, as they call physical, digital put together. It's not a new phenomenon. I mean, I think I first came more consciously aware of the power of space and the physical. I think I started to see it when dealerships started to move from the old school. You turn up to a dealership, all the cars are on the forecourt. There's a salesman behind the desk. They come out and see you, and I think they kind of got the feeling that, particularly for female customers or customers who weren't comfortable with cars, they found it quite an intimidating place to be. So they started to model their dealerships more on retail stores. So now you go in and there's a barista in there, and it's open space, and it's floor to ceiling windows, and the cars are displayed in a certain way. And I think that's when I first kind of became aware of it. And then through a couple of conferences that I've hosted and sort of the other brands I've spoken to. So I remember Adidas doing an amazing presentation. It was actually at the Trump Hotel in Scotland. Don't hate me for that. They were presenting about what their physical experience does, and they were talking about how they use their store, particularly ones in London, as co-working, where they bring sort of fashion people together, co-workers together. It's not just about the product and what they're selling, but it's also about the experience they have in that store that kind of links to the brand as well. So I think you've got kind of different things. And I suppose the other one, I think Apple, in their first 3 years of having retail stores, grossed $1 billion in sales. And if you look at the layout of their store, it's all predicated on touch, feel, like the product. Once it's in your hand, it's part of that experience. So just 2 or 3 little examples of where I've seen that kind of thing. But Matt, you've spent time with airports in retail. Where have you seen, or tell us about your experience around physical spaces and stuff, and what your views are on it, and maybe share a couple of examples of where you've seen it work really well and the impact it's made.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we look at airports as an example, so prior to to setting up Ethos Farm, I'd been in aviation probably for about 15 years. And when you look at an airport, and I'm making a massive assumption here that all your listeners and viewers have been to an airport.
Yeah.
On average,
Yeah,
the average UK person takes about 2 return flights a year on average, and let alone business travelers. So I think we've probably, it's a safe assumption that we've all been through airports. We've all experienced some really good things, and we've probably all experienced some really, really bad things as well. And my goodness, does the media take attention to it when it goes wrong? That will hit headline news really quickly. You get a huge snowstorm, massive disruption, and flights not being able to take off, that won't stay private. That will be headline news in seconds. So I think there's always been quite an interest from the public as to what goes on in airports. And as I say, when things go right, they go really, really well. And when they go wrong, they go terribly wrong really quickly. And that's because they're such complex environments that ultimately, one of the most unique things is that an airport operator does not own all parts of the customer journey.
Exactly.
Right? A lot of those touch points are third party run. And so it's quite unlike any other business operation where you can have your hand around everything and say, okay, I can control from the minute that you decide to book a holiday through to the minute that you land back in the UK, I can control all of it. Airports can control a lot of it, but actually in a lot of cases, it's subcontracted to third parties. But here's the rub. Passengers don't care.
Yeah.
They do not care that if Border Force talk to them rudely, they don't necessarily see that as Border Force. They see that as the airport. That's the airport treating me really, really poorly. And so what airports have is this unique ecosystem, but they own the asset. And so one of the major factors that they can do to improve the end-to-end customer experience is to make that asset, that physical experience, the best that it possibly can be. But again, that's a huge amount of money and a huge amount of investment that potentially is needed to do that. And in a lot of cases, especially when you look at certain terminals in the UK, some of them were built in the 60s and are in desperate need for redevelopment. And so really what airports are trying their best to do is to look at the end-to-end physical experience, combine that with digital, also combine it with data. A lot of what we're seeing is a massive thirst in the industry for better data because that can inform your decisions. I mean, that's ubiquitous for every industry, I think. But then looking at how you can make that physical experience as frictionless as possible by combining digital and physical together. And you're seeing that, and you will see it over the next 24 months. You're seeing next gen security coming in, which is a great example of new technology mixed with a physical space. So that's going to mean that instead of taking all your liquids and your laptops out of the bag, you're going to be able to keep a lot of that in your bag, which is going to hopefully improve process speed, which is going to make the trip through security a lot easier and quicker. That's a really good example where digital and physical are coming together to make that what is usually the most stressful pinch point of the end-to-end experience is going through security, and that's measured by multiple different factors. That's going to become much more frictionless is the plan. I'm sure there's going to be some challenges.
And I think with airports, as you said, it's the beginning of your holiday or your journey. And if that doesn't start off well, it starts to impact the rest of your holiday. So I think that's why there's so much pressure on airports to get it right. And just going back to your point around airports being of interest, you've got all these docuseries, there's Border Force, there's all sorts of shows on TV. People are really interested to see what it's like. Right?
It's a universal experience, isn't it? Matt's right. Most people watching and listening to this will have had some experience of an airport, whether recent or when they were a child or whatever. And I think it's interesting as well because often in travel we talk about the first and last mile being the kind of the key moments that people remember. And I think with the airport, you're absolutely right. You arrive there and your holiday begins the moment you hit the airport. And actually, when you come back, I often hear people when you're coming from holiday, particularly when people have checked bags in, when you're waiting at that carousel for your bag to come through. So you could have a great flight. It could be a really good experience. And suddenly you land and you're waiting for your bags and you've got that anxiety. A, is your bag going to be there? And B, it's taking ages. That can also impact on that. And I think also, interestingly, just as a bit of a segue, you were talking about the physical side and the digital changes in security, and Birmingham Airport has just we're still undergoing a huge amount of change. And they took a lot of flack for how that was done. You know, there were pictures of queues outside. I mean, to be honest, I flew during that period and I didn't really have an issue. I got through in and out pretty quickly. So I never really experienced what they were being shown on social media. But they were getting a lot of flack for, you know, what's going on. The queues are outside and people taking pictures on social media of massive long queues. And look, I don't work for them. I don't know them. I'm not in their organization. But my external observation is what I felt like was missing was just that, from the customer's perspective, better signage, better expectation setting. Like, it's always in that kind of communication piece. But I don't want to take us off track, but it was just a thought, you know, in terms of, you just triggered a thought when you were talking about that. And I guess the ongoing thing is that when you are undergoing those works and things are happening in the space, that's part of the experience. You've got to think about how you set the expectation for customers.
And I think one of the things that I'd love to kind of hear from you on, Matt, is how you know, delivering a personalized experience is easy to do through digital means. Like, you know, a lot of organizations are able to deliver that personalized experience. And you talked about data. There must be data on the passengers, on the people that are traveling. How can you use that data to deliver a bit more of a personalized experience? Because for me, we're, as passengers, are seen as numbers in an airport, right? When you're walking through, nobody knows who you are. No, you don't. Well, it feels that way anyway, right? The way you're treated, you are literally treated as a number as you walk through that. So I'm just interested to see if there's any work being done around being able to deliver more of a personal.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I can assure you, having worked with multiple airports, which we do, you're not just a number.
Yeah.
You know, as much as that might feel like it, and again, I'm sure your viewers probably share that thought. But I guess the first insight is that airports, unlike a lot of industries, have a very unique service quality, a thing called ASQ that most airports sign up to, not all, but most. And when I say most, I mean in the world, not just in the UK. ASQ, some of your listeners would have had it, is a survey that asks you to rate every single customer touch point that you've had an interaction with out of 5. You score it out of 5. And so most airports that subscribe to those surveys and then get the results as well have got a real unique insight to be able to say, okay, across every single customer touch point, this is how we score, right from the moment that I arrive in car parking all the way through to when I get my bags back and when I come back into the UK at the baggage carousel. Every single customer touch point is benchmarked at most airports internationally. That's then published, and you can see where you rank against other airports of a comparable size. So that's the first bit. So they get a huge amount of intel and data from doing that, and they can see where they fall down versus their counterparts. And I think if you're listening to this podcast and you want to understand, you know, not just about airports, but how you can take that, I think benchmarking is hugely important. If you can gather some sort of benchmarking data that really tells you how you compare to your competitors, I think that's massively useful. Most airports will use that as some of their investment decision criteria. So they'll say, okay, we're massively falling down in security. Our ASQ has dropped down to 3.1. We should be at 4.5 or something like that. Everyone else in our peer group is at 4.2. We want to aim a lot higher. That will trigger some investment invariably. So that's the first bit. The second bit is that all of us travel through under different personas. So I traveled through a major UK airport 2 weeks ago as a family. I was there with my family going on holiday. My wants and needs are very different when I'm with my family than they will be if I'm just traveling on my own as a businessman. And airports do tailor for that, or a lot of good airports. If they're doing it well, they will tailor for it. So the good airports will have great spaces airside for families to relax. They might have soft play areas. They will certainly have a great restaurant offering where I can take the family, where they can do food for all of us, that caters for all of us. Vice versa, the ones that are really, really good for business travelers will have the lounge. They'll have the high-end retail potentially, and all of the other good stuff that you kind of expect as you're going through. So my wants and requirements as a passenger out of the physical experience change dramatically depending on the type of journey I'm going on. If I'm on business, I just want to get through as quickly as possible. I want to get to my gate. I don't want to muck about. I probably left it quite late because I haven't got anyone else to worry about, and I just want to get through the journey. If I'm with my family, we're probably likely to get there considerably earlier. airports are fantastic, or the good airports are fantastic at creating brilliant airside retail spaces. And you will have all seen good examples of that and bad examples of that. And I'll come on to that in a minute. Great airside retail means I'm going to get there early. It's a destination and I want to spend some money and have some downtime because it's the start of my holiday. Excellent airports actually say, do you know what? It's not just about after security when you get into retail that you need to relax. It's before that. The whole thing should be seamless.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to an airport, a major airport, and they said, oh, once you get through security, then you have a decompression zone where your holiday can really begin. And I said, this is wrong. So basically what you're saying is for the first third of the journey, it's awful. Then you can relax and put your belt back on and, and feel kind of relaxed again. And then you can start enjoying yourself. Yeah, ideally, the ones that do it really, really well are looking at the entire end-to-end journey and actually saying, right from the beginning, it's an enjoyable experience. So
it's a really interesting point that you make there, because I think it does start from how the airport sees itself, whether it sees itself as just we're an airport and people come through us, or whether it sees itself as a destination. And again, you're more of an expert in this than I am, but I was just reading a little bit about Singapore Airport. They've got cinema in there. They've got, trees in there. They've got plants. And they see, because they're a hub for so many connecting flights and people transition through, I think some of the thought process in their design is people are going to spend dwell time here. And rather than sat in seats waiting around with their bags and blankets over them, there's stuff for them to do that makes the time pass. It's that, Rory Sutherland's brilliant at articulating this. It's not about the weights, but it's the quality of the weight that drives the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in Changi myself 2 weeks ago as part of the trip I was on with my family. Another really good example is Hamad International Airport in Qatar. So they are very, very clear. And going back to your earlier point, Iqbal, about am I just a number? They're really clear about who their demographic is and who's traveling through. They know that I think it's around about 80% of people traveling through the airport are just there to connect, right? Only 20% are flying in and out. The rest, everyone flies in from the UK or wherever it is and then bounces on to wherever they're going on to their connecting journey. And so I think it's a really interesting case study, and I'd urge your listeners to look at it. They've gone, okay, well then in that case, then what we want to do is create one of the best airports in the world for a connecting journey. And we want you to say, do you know what? I could have just an hour stopover in Qatar. I'm going to choose to spend 12 hours there. They've just invested in incredible new facilities to improve the weight. So as you mentioned, Vinay, so there's a Dior spa there. There's a Louis Vuitton cafe. There's these amazing products and experiences that people want to stick on Instagram and say, I've been here. It's a destination. It's an experience. Rather than just your standard bog standard kind of.
It's part of your holiday, isn't it? I think that's what you're doing. You're adding to the value that you're getting out of your holiday, and you're getting a very unique experience that you probably can't get anywhere else. So that makes it quite compelling, doesn't it?
I suppose it then gives a further challenge, doesn't it? Because then the airline needs to continue that on from the point you come out of the airport, you've got through your gates, you're now on the aeroplane. How does that? So imagine you're at Qatar Airport. You've had a brilliant 12-hour layover. You've used the Louis Vuitton cafe. You've been in the Dior spa, and then your airline that's docked waiting for you to arrive. They kind of cattle you into the gate, and you're kind of onto the flight. And suddenly, some of that great feel factor can subside, right? And although it's not the responsibility of the airline, I think it's joining up that, because all of those touch points together.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing that for me is missing as a traveler is I'd love for me to be able to plan my journey at the airport. So imagine having an app like that knows me, knows that I'm going on a family holiday, is making suggestions, is finding me the easiest path for me to get to, the airline that I'm traveling with. It's joining the dots, and all the way from parking your car to traveling in, all of these things are still it feels very separate. Simply going back to your point, right? These are separate entities providing that service all in one place, but it's it feels as if surely there's got to be a way to join those dots together for me as a passenger. so that I feel like I've got a bit of control
Yeah.
of that journey, right?
Yeah, I totally get it. And no one wants to download multiple apps, right, for a journey. No one wants to get, okay, I've got the airline app and I've got the air, but that is the reality at the moment because we are quite fragmented. We are in a situation where ultimately, as I said earlier on, the airport own the asset. Then you've got separate brands for the airlines. Then you've got separate subcontractors, in which case Ethos Farm are often one of those who are providing ambassadorial support or support throughout the journey.
Yeah.
When you go to check-in, that's a totally different brand as well, and that could be subcontracted as well.
Yeah.
So you do have a fragmented ecosystem. There are some that are getting it right, and again, without I'm sounding like I'm creating an advert for Hammer, but there you've got the airport is owned by Qatar Airways, who also obviously own the airline. So in the example you gave, Vinay, actually they do own a lot of that end-to-end journey. And what you're seeing there is that then they really do have control over an ecosystem. There they are able to say, okay, you want to go to the lounge, you want to do click and collect on retail, you want to do, all of these peripheral things.
Yes.
Well, let's do it all in one place rather than it being fragmented. But in many cases, a lot of the UK airports, they don't own the airline as well. It's a totally separate brand. When I look at, for example, Ryanair, they really just want to get you through the airport as quickly as possible because actually they've got a totally different view on the world. They want you to spend on the aircraft. They don't want you to necessarily spend in the airport. So the less time you spend at the airport, the better, because then you'll spend their duty for their onboard retail.
And look, to add further complexity, the other thing, I mean, you were talking about data. The other thing is about who owns the data. So if you've now got you're an airline customer, that's the data between you and the airline.
Yeah, exactly.
You're now in the airport, but for the apps to be able to do what you're talking about, they need to be able to share data.
Yeah.
Then you've got the complications of geography. You've got EU data laws and regulation. Then you've got the non-EU and like yesterday we were talking just about the whole ethics of data in relation to AI, but we got into data bit. And whilst the EU have kind of seem to have got their regulation piece in order, releasing the latest legislation, it does rely on the rest of the world to play to the same rules in some way for it to really, really work. And we know not everyone's going to play to the same rules. So then how does that happen? So I think that's that added layer of complexity. Then you've got the different motivations of airlines and different parts of the airline. So, interestingly, as you said, the revenue for Ryanair is more important to them. It's better to have that on the airline than you go and spend that wallet share in the airport. But the airport will be like, no, we want the wallet share. So you've got these kind of competing forces. So I think, it is a really complex. It is a really complex thing. And I think the more and more you look at it, right from how you described it at the beginning of all the different parts and subcontractors, and then there's just layers and layers and layers of more. Sometimes it makes me sit here and think, it's a wonder they ever get it right.
Well, that's true. Interestingly, to quote a COO of a major airport, their words were, "Every day is a miracle."
Yeah,
and that's not because they were dysfunctional. It was because actually, when you really look at everything that's going wrong on a day-to-day basis, it's incredible that hundreds of thousands of people are passing through, most of which pass through in great time, have a great experience. And I think we all always focus, I think it's human nature, that when things go wrong or we get someone complain, that's what we focus about. Whereas actually 99% of people are going through and having a great experience and take off broadly on time and all the rest of it.
That's a good point. You mentioned, the way in which you're understanding the voice of the customer, like you're getting them to do surveys. I'm wondering whether there's other techniques that can be used to try and see what's really going on with the experience. With obviously, there's a lot of video footage. You could potentially even listen in on conversation. Not suggesting that should be done, but we see it in other forms of customer experience, right? When you're contacting a brand through other channels, not physical.
Yeah.
Everything is monitored.
Like calls are transcribed.
Exactly.
All that kind of thing.
You've got the analytics you need to be able to make the right decisions. And I'm wondering, like, I've had some government agencies talking to me about how do we know our people are engaging the citizen in the way that we want them to?
Yeah.
How do we monitor that?
Yeah.
And we've looked at ways of deploying mics and things like that to be able to pick up on conversations. understand the sentiment and things like
Yeah,
that.
and in the last episode, we talked about AI-enabled cameras looking at facial expressions and body language and being able to analyze
Exactly.
those kind of things
Yeah.
and surface those data points
Yeah.
in real time. But it's interesting, isn't it, that when you call a contact center,
Yeah.
the call can be transcribed in real time. They can surface up these touch
And
points.
you accept it as a consumer,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But maybe in a physical environment. And I'm working with a bank at the moment, and they are also looking at ways in which they can leverage the technology that's already there, right? You've got the mics, you've got the cameras. How about really understanding what your customer's experiencing when they're there? I'm just wondering, I mean, obviously airports are a great example of that, but I'm wondering whether we could start to use more of this technology.
Definitely, and I think you're seeing more and more that there's advancements in technology that airports will be utilizing. I suppose there's a couple of differences between kind of the contact center analogy in airports.
Yeah.
Usually when you dial up into a contact center, you're told, for recording
Yeah.
purposes, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah,
yeah.
this is going to be recorded. You can't necessarily do that when you're in an airport, but
Yeah.
there are some great examples of how airports are using technology. Most are using PIR sensors and heat sensors to look at real-time heat mapping. So a lot of good airports, who are doing it well, are able to go, okay, here's immigration at this time of day. It starts to go bright red in terms of heat. We, obviously, every airport will track and flow their inbound passengers and their outbound passengers, so they'll know when their peaks are, right?
Yeah.
But here lies some of the complexity with that as well. So a lot of that's driven actually by the airline model. So, for example, an airport that predominantly has low-cost airlines, the low-cost airline model means they do not make money unless that aircraft is in the air. So therefore, they all want to take off at what's called slot 1 first thing in the morning, which is why, as you probably know, as travelers, invariably you end up getting up at 3 a.m. to get a flight at 7 o'clock or something like that. Well, there's a reason for that. That's because that's the earliest possible slot that aircraft could take off.
Yeah.
And that means they can do a number of segments in a day.
Right.
They can land, come back, and they can essentially do maybe 4 or 5 sectors in a day. Well, what happens with that is that all of the low cost carriers want to do that, which means you have huge spikes first thing in the morning. I think Stansted Airport is one of the busiest airports in Europe between the hours of 4 and 7.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Then invariably it will trough, and then it will pick back up again as you get the second wave, and then it will trough again. The problem with that is, do you design for the peak or do you design for the average? Because if you design for the peak, you would probably have to build twice as large a space, whereas actually for a great big chunk of the day, it's not necessarily going to get used, and you don't need as many people, or you don't need as many security lanes.
Yeah.
So it's always a balance. Heat mapping is really, really useful in terms of technology, because most airports will say, okay, we can see where we get congestion, and then we can kind of reprioritize how we go through immigration, for example. Another really good example is now, and again, most people would have gone through it, is the biometric scanners at immigration.
Yeah.
So immigration quite often used to get queues for hours and hours and hours. I don't know if you remember.
Some countries still do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, very much so. Now, invariably, quite a lot of the time, as long as you've got a passport that's valid to do it, you'll be able, and you've got, if you're traveling with kids, they're over 10 years old in the UK, you're able to get through that. We did, as we came back through Heathrow, within minutes.
We had it in Dubai. It was a breeze straight through. No issue.
So there's a real good example where technology is getting better at a pinch point that hurts, customer scores, and actually people are flowing through quickly. I mentioned earlier on, in terms of security, that will be the same at the other end of the journey, where hopefully you'll be able to get through even quicker than before.
It's actually the reason why my wife hates going on holiday. The security process, like as a family, right? She gets anxiety. Just thinking about going through security, and it's a massive relief when you get through it, and it's like, especially when you've got you really young kids, with milk bottles and things like that. So that can be quite difficult.
And again, airports that are doing this really well, you'll see that they've got family lanes now. So they'll say, okay, do you know what? Actually, quite often the families slow a lane down, because especially if you've got a pushchair and stuff like that, right? That's going to slow the whole process down. Why don't we? And you're stressed by it, so why don't we create a separate private lane for you guys to go through? You have a calmer experience. You also don't slow down the rest of the passengers as you're doing that, and everybody's happy. So, but they're using data, and they're using pinch point data to understand where you're really experiencing pain. Security, without doubt, every single time a survey is done, is always the worst part of the journey.
No, I absolutely get it.
I know we talked a lot about airports, but when I ran innovation at National Express, we had companies come and pitch to us about different problems to solve. And I remember one of them was a company that used anonymized data on your handset, on your mobile phone, so it would track you all the way through. And a lot of shopping malls use it to see where customers go in the mall. It doesn't identify the customer as an individual. It's an anonymized piece of data. It just knows that device and where their device is gone. And we were trying to repurpose that thinking to go, actually, when a coach goes from here to London, where do people go? And to our surprise, we found out there's a fair chunk of people that travel into London to travel back out again. It's because the coach stops at Victoria. They don't necessarily want to go to Victoria, but there's some data to support that. And you know, that retail model, that's where it came from. It was looking at, you know, when people, and if you look at a lot of shopping malls, they're two-ended. You've got luxury brands at one end, and as you go further down, you've got more of the kind of mainstream budget
High
brands.
street brands, yeah.
So again, they look at where people dwell and where they start and when they finish off. And so you have that whole movement and flow of people in there. And I suppose just the other thing, again, because it's a recent experience and expanding the conversation out a little bit more to retail, I think wayfinding in airports is one thing. I'm sure there's lots of stories that can tell about that. But also, I mean, again, Dubai Mall, we were in there and they've got this massive touchscreen thing, and you type the name of the shop in that you want to go to or whatever. Not only does it come up with what floor it's on, it then pivots and then gives you a map and gives you a walking route to show you where you're going. So it's got this animated person that's going through, tells you the time from there to how long it's going to take you to get there. And then it kind of goes from a flat map to a 3D map. And it's like, it's pretty cool. And I'm sure other shopping malls around the world might have it. I mean, I've only seen it there, but I thought it's gone from just a static map on a thing where you look at and you're trying to work out, I'm here. And how do I get to there? To it's there. And it also had a thing where you can scan it and then take that wayfinding with you on your mobile device as you went through the mall. It's pretty cool.
And I think this is the bit that I find really interesting is how do you combine that kind of physical experience, right? If we kind of shift attention to retail, for example, I see a lot of that, right? Where you go into a store and they almost force you to download their app to have access to a discount that you can then use. It's how then you use that personalized information you have through that app to be able to deliver that kind of digital / physical experience. And I think this is, certainly since the pandemic, we've seen retail completely shift and change to try and offer a bit more of a frictionless experience. You're not having to queue anymore, being able to walk out with your goods, right? You're not having to go to a till and pay for it anymore.
Amazon Go, things like that. I think, the returns experience as well. I mean, Amazon recently introduced that you don't even have to box it anymore. You just turn up and drop it in at your post office and they send it for you. I think I've talked about that before. So you've got all these kind of things. I think, and it'd be interesting what your views on this, but I think going back to data, I think the intention of those apps was always, we want to do that to collect the data on the customers. I think where it hasn't quite happened is that the usage of that data to curate experiences to the expectations of personalization hasn't quite happened for lots of organizations yet. They've got piles of data. I was talking about this yesterday in the Cisco thing, that it's data rich, but being starved of actual insight that really be able to show you.
It's actionable change, isn't it? Like how do you convert all of this data to actionable change? It's one thing making sense of it, but actually trying to convert that to something that can actually make you make a positive impact.
I think when you look at everything you've just talked about, ultimately it comes down to culture and what you want your culture of your brand and your service product to be. Because, as you say, there's more and more data out there that allows you to make more and more informed decisions. When I look at airports, and again, most of you will nod when you hear this, but ultimately, going back to what I said earlier on, airports only have a small proportion of the customer journey. So where they make their money is car parking and retail, and obviously airline charges. But in terms of non-aeronautical revenue, they make it out of car parking and retail. And so car parking, we've all experienced that. We've all experienced the drop-off charge at most airports, which is a real grudge purchase for many. But when you look at retail, most of you will have experienced what I call the river, right? So the river is, and they do heat mapping on it, is, okay, I'm going to push you through a walkthrough store where we get 100% footfall. And in fact, the river of the rest of your journey means that you will get 100% footfall past every single front door of every single retail unit.
Yeah.
Well, that's hugely lucrative for the airport because that means they can go to any retailer and go, you could get 100% of X million passengers walking past your front door.
You can charge what you want.
Yeah. But that's massively important, which is why you will see when you next go through an airport, invariably most of them adopt this kind of river model with 100% footfall, so that there's no cold spots. It's just hot spots all the way through the journey, because no retailer is going to pay a lot of money for, inverted commas, what they call a cold spot. So I think there's the whole piece of commercial and retail will always drive a large of the investment decision, a large proportion of the investment decision at an airport, because that's where they make the money. And if you don't base it around that, you're probably not going to be in business for a very long time. That said, when you talked about data and making things better and what do you do with the data to improve the physical and digital, I do think there's a lot of airports that are getting it right and making their decisions. As I mentioned earlier on, I gave some examples of where investment is taking place to improve the end-to-end journey. But I think it goes back to a much bigger question on culture.
Yeah.
So ultimately, at board level, are you talking about CX? Are you talking, and I'm not just talking about an airport, although that's pertinent to our discussion, but are you talking about customer experience at board level? Because if you're not, then what that says to me is that probably that's not part of your culture, in which case your investment decisions aren't necessarily going to be based around putting the customer at the forefront of your decision, unless it makes you just a lot of money. Yeah. So, and I've been in airport groups where there's talk about offering great service, but when you put forward a CapEx paper for investment in something that's going to improve the service, invariably it's kind of all looking at the cost of that versus the potential upside, which will just be an uptick in customer satisfaction scores. We're not prepared to invest.
I mean, yes, absolutely. I agree with you. I'm sitting here shaking my head violently in agreement with you. And I would take it a stage further and chunk up a little bit further and say, it's not just about the conversation, is the conversation about CX? Are they having the conversation about customer experience in a commercial way? So are they associating that the customer experience has a direct hit on the bottom line?
But surely the data gives you that, does it not?
It doesn't. And this is the problem, I think, not problem. This is the challenge for CXs. The customer experience return on investment is over a period of time.
Yeah.
It's not always an in-year return on revenue. If you're doing things like operational restructuring, reducing headcount, if you can improve the experience and maybe, you can drive revenue and things like that. But actually the overall experience, the overall return on pounds spent on experience is through return purchase. It's through repurchase. It's through advocacy. It's through recommendation. And that's harder to prove often when you're doing those cases. But I think the quality of conversation that your board has to say, look, we see customer experience as important, not just because it's a nice thing to do and it's service, but we see it as an important part of our commercial strategy, because we believe that if you treat people well, if you give them good experiences and you provide touch points that are simple, easy, frictionless as much as they can be, enjoyable, and leave people with a feeling that I want to do this again, you've done your job, and then people will come back and experience that. Your thing about Qatar Airways, there are probably people that will go, they'll look at it and go, right, I can go to India, or I can go to Australia via Dubai, I can go via Singapore, or I can go via Qatar. Maybe I've got my routes wrong, but take that as an example. There'll be people that will go through Qatar and go, actually, next time we fly, we're going to choose to go through that airport because it was a better experience, and we'll choose Qatar Airlines rather than the other two. They will prove to that. But as you know, and I've said before, not all loyalty is not all equal. Not everybody has that level of emotion. Some people it's transactional, some people it's just habit and convenience. So you're never going to get everyone there. But the holy grail is to get people to that emotional level of connection to go, I'm making this choice because I enjoyed the experience, and therefore I'm making it as my default choice rather than there's something else.
But that comes with time, doesn't it? As you said, it's a combination of things. You also want to try and create a community as well, right?
Yeah.
You're going back to the whole concept of culture. It's making sure the people that you're hiring, and you mentioned employee experience earlier, and I think that's a big part of it as well. We focus a lot on the customer experience, but actually if you can get your employees fully engaged in the brand, and they believe in your vision and your culture, then they will move mountains for your customers. And I think that particularly in a physical environment, it is huge, right? We talk about technology, but actually it's about the people, how they're being trained. Do they really buy into the brand that they're working for? Are you hiring the right sorts of people? And again, airports is another example of you get a real mixed bag, right? In terms of, people that show a lot of empathy and others actually just see it as a job and treat you like a number.
Yeah, well, I mean, jump in a sec, but I think, that inconsistency of service is the killer of trust for most brands.
Yeah.
The difference in physical retail is that you can physically see the people that are serving you. In the contact center, you can't see the person messing about in between calls, laying back in their chair, not paying attention. Your assumption is they're on the call to you, they're paying attention, right? But in physical space, you can, and it can be, again, I was sharing a story yesterday of a restaurant where we had an amazing meal. The server was superb, friendly, knowledgeable, funny, engaging, made us feel like VIPs. We were the only people in that restaurant, even though it was packed, it made us feel that way. And then we got moved to the bar area after the meal, and it was a complete different experience. The person that served us was the complete opposite, but yet it's the same business. And this is where culture really comes in, and that driving that culture is about, people often say to me, "Oh, but it's got to come from the top." Well, it does get decided at the top, but actually, I think the powerful layer in any organization where it really grips is the middle management, because the exec can set the vision, they set the agenda, and they drive that quality of conversation. But then, as it trickles down the organization, you are relying on that middle management layer to lead, manage, connect people to the vision day in, day out, and make people feel valued. And the same as you want to make a customer feel valued and wanted, that same discipline applies to your people.
100%.
To your point, which is if you get the insides right, the outsides take care of themselves. But I don't know what your view is on that.
So I think it's really important to talk about kind of the power of happy, right? So Airports Council International, which is a huge governing body which works with most airports, they have done a huge amount of research that show happy customers spend 1.5 times more. So if I can get through my experience in security fairly quickly, I feel in a good place, and I'm broadly happy with my experience. Number one, I'll have longer dwell time because I've got through quicker, right? So I've got more time to spend. And number two, I'm going to be happier. I'm likely to spend more versus if I've had a horrendous experience and then kind of have a less amount of time, I'm probably not going to spend so much. So happy customers spend more. Happy employees who are well informed with the right tools in the right place at the right time, they're going to provide the best service. And I know it's kind of a bit cliche, but it is true that if you treat your people well, they'll look after the customers for you, and they'll do the rest for you. And that's something that we definitely passionately believe in at Ethos. I mentioned right at the start of this, we started off as a customer experience business, but actually we very quickly, I said, well, it's about employee experience as well, because you don't get the CX without the EX.
No.
So if you can drive the right employee experience, give people the right training. I did a talk a couple of years ago now, and it was an aviation conference actually, and I asked people to put their hands up as I started the talk, and I said, how many of you understand your company's CX vision? Right, and so a handful of people put their hands up and said, yeah, I understand it. I said, how many people feel confident that your people understand your CX vision? And a load of the hands went down. And bear in mind what I've said about airports, that a lot of them are third party, in terms of touch points. And the third question was, how many of you feel confident that your third party operators know your customer vision? At that point, near enough every single hand went down. So some of the airports are now getting it right, are going, okay, we need to be really clear about this. We need to be clear about our vision, clear about what we want, drive the employee experience the best way that we can, but that every single person, whether they're working directly for us or not, is clear about that vision, is incentivized to deliver that vision. And then we reward them when they do it really, really well. And that's what we work with a lot of airports on.
Yeah. I mean, the picture you painted there, the thing that comes up to mind to me is that more than anywhere else, collaboration and cooperation in an airport is hugely important, because yes, your third parties you want them to understand your CX vision for the airport, but they've also got to buy into it. And you've got to understand their CX vision and find the dots that connect it, because that's how you create the overall end-to-end experience. I had some experience of this again at National Express with We have services going to Heathrow. Heathrow have their own CX and customer charter. NX had its own, and you find it, or, similarly, if we've got coaches going into Victoria, it's not a National Express station, it's owned by TfL. So the employees aren't necessarily ours, all of them. So you've got all these complications. But when it works, it's because those people, despite the badge that they sit under, have an appreciation and an understanding of what it is we're trying to deliver, and then they co-work better to deliver
Because it
it.
impacts their customer. I think if you look at it more holistically and think, actually, I've done a great job here, it's not my job to think about what other parts of this experience does. It'll impact my customer.
Yeah.
So I think if everybody's thinking that way, then
Well, actually, I think it's a step further, isn't it? It's you go from my customer to the customer.
Yeah.
That we all contribute to their experience of. Because when you're thinking of my customer, there's almost that, well, I own this person.
yeah,
The relationship's with me, so therefore it's my job to look after them. But it's not. We're all going to touch them in some way or shape or form along that journey.
yeah,
And the more collaborative we are, and I think, travel, transport, leisure are massive examples of where you've got multiple parties involved. And that has to be part of the conversation. If we're going to transform railways in this country, same thing. How do you have the conversation, whether it's in public ownership or private ownership, the conversation about all of these parts of the journey.
But this is where I think, regardless of aviation or rail or, whatever industry your listeners work in, this is where the power of procurement can really kick in. So, and which a lot of people wouldn't necessarily join up CX with procurement, but again, with some of the companies, not just in aviation, but, we, as I said earlier on, we work outside of aviation as well. It's all well and good having this vision, but how do you enshrine that in process? Because otherwise you're just going to sit there and talk about it and go, wouldn't it be great if?
Yeah.
And maybe you can do some training, and maybe you can do a big campaign, and it will be a big bang, and then it will die a death within 12 months, and everyone go back to the way they are. Because actually human nature is such that why would I go bend over backwards for your brand when I don't work for your brand? So I don't care. I'm bothered about my brand, and that's where I want to be. So we do a lot of work with procurement now, where we say, okay, within your procurement packages, when you're procuring services for third-party operations, you need to include your CX vision, your CX strategy, your service standards, your training. All of that has to be a prerequisite, and the third-party operator has to prove that they've undertaken it. Now, that's been unbelievably quite a bit of a game changer. But one, I think, as a nugget that people can take is, look, unless you enshrine it in some sort of process and it has a KPI against your third-party operators will move on. And so that way, it now forms part of monthly boards. That way, they get measured against it. Some of them get penalized if they don't operate in the right way. And that's been a big game changer for a lot of airports and other brands in other industries who are now getting it right, because they're saying, do you know what? We'll take control of the whole of the journey. You're going to work for us on part of that journey. But in order to do that, you need to prove that all of your team are on brand.
Yeah, and everybody's got skin in the game, isn't it, as well, in that sense. So they're all compelled to actually adhere to this.
It's a fantastic point. I think, procurement are often one of the forgotten parts of the jigsaw. The services you procure, the suppliers you pick, they all contribute to that thing. And so if they're not aligned as well, if you go and procure software, for example, you came in and sold a certain software platform, and we just went for the cheapest one because that was it. And there was no consideration to how does the culture of that organization align with us? Do they share the same vision? Are they invested in a continuous roadmap and all of those kind of things and working with us? It might not feel like it at the time, but eventually it has a knock-on effect to how you work.
And honestly, it does. For me personally, I worked for Zoom for a number of years, and with what they did during the pandemic, has such a lasting impact on how people feel about the brand. And it's actually the easiest thing I've ever sold to a customer, because you'd go into a meeting, they'd know you come from Zoom. Everybody's got a great story to tell about the fact that they were able to connect with their grandparents or whatever using your service. Just tell us where to sign. Like it was one of the, and all because of what they had done during that period. And even now, it's that lasting impact, which you can't really quantify. I think in terms of, you can't go to a CFO and say, look, if we guarantee happiness for our employees and customers. And by the way, that was the culture when I went into that business. The CEO was talking about happy customers, happy employees, and I was like, what does this actually mean? Like, these are just words. How do we actually execute against this type of culture? And there were the right processes in place.
Yeah.
Everybody had skin in the game to ensure that, we are delivering the right culture for our people and then eventually our customers as well.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we do is Ethos Farm in our people solutions business is all of our team are regularly audited through a digital audit. And that's on body language, uniform, interactions, how proactive they were with guests. But over and above that, you then score points. And if you score enough points, you get put into a draw. And we actually twice a year give away holidays for someone on the front line, plus their partner, plus spending money, which you can imagine if you're coming back and you're on, a kind of lower wage and you're coming back home and say, I've just won a holiday for 2 plus some spending money as well. But that's the reward if you're permanently on brand against some very key, clear metrics that we share with our team. And it's kind of back to that procurement analogy as well. If you can make it clear and you can enshrine it in process, that for me is the way that you get from the top of the pyramid, from the CEO all the way down to the frontline team for people to behave in the same way.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you don't have that golden thread from the top to the bottom and people go, well, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily going to behave online with a brand that you want me to. So all of our team are motivated and incented to do so. And when I talk about a great employee experience, that means they're really happy because they're in chance for winning holidays and there's other perks that we give our team. But they only unlock those perks if they deliver against some key CX criteria that, by the way, is in line with the brand that they serve, not necessarily our brand, the brand that they serve. And that for me is a great example of how you can kind of pull a vision and strategy down to the front line.
I love that. That's really good. I love the gamification side of it as well. Like I get the reward element, but actually it gamifies it a little bit, like point system. But a lot of people have mixed feelings about this because it creates competitiveness, but I think competition's great because it helps you to step up your game, right? So you can really do your good work.
But I mean, look, golden thread, I think is a great place for us to end the conversation. It's been fantastic. Thank you for coming in, Matt. We've really enjoyed having you with us.
Yeah, thank you.
I think there's been some real great value in this conversation. And listen, Matt, if people want to find you, if people want to connect with you, how do they best get in touch with you? Have you got a newsletter? Have you got a website you want them to go to? What's the thing you'd like to do?
Yeah, our website's www.ethosfarm.com. Or feel free to just message me directly. I'm on Matt, M-A-T, at ethosfarm.com. And I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
First guest. What did you think of that?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's a different dynamic having 3 people, but also a completely different perspective on the physical experience, which is what we kind of touched on. And, we talked a lot about airports because there's a lot to get to. You don't actually comprehend and realize all the different parts to the customer experience that they kind of walk through it. So it was, to get that intel.
Yeah, I thought, Matt really painted a vivid picture. I often use the analogy of CX, the top of the jigsaw box and everyone having the pieces, but it really just sharp focus on the amount of pieces that are involved in the journey. And, I think there is opportunity clearly for digital to play a greater role. There's some challenges around data sharing and all of those kind of things, but we're starting to see, as you already pointed out, elements of digital coming in. I think it's only going to grow. And I think that, things like TikTok Shop and people buying online, it's currently all online. Might we see a physical representation of TikTok Shop in malls of the future? What will malls of the future look like? What will those spaces look like differently?
Yeah.
Clearly, the challenge in a lot of these places is where we would have years ago, it would have been the retail space is a place that you come to buy, and that's the only reason you go there. Actually, it's becoming the place where you go for an experience, includes buying, but it's broader than just going there to buy.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It is about enhancing the experience because actually, there was a time where everybody felt that retail was dying because of what we'd seen with our own high street.
Yeah.
Right? Brands closing down because they felt, no, everybody's just buying online. But actually, it's shifting now because when you see malls like Westfield, for example, full of people because they're experienced and you see that reflect inside of the stores as well. Everything's becoming quite digital. I've been speaking to a particular retailer, and they're looking to digitize the mirrors.
Yeah.
So while you're getting changed, you're logging, using your QR code.
Yeah.
You'll get a personalized experience. You'll know your size. You'll
Interesting.
know what kind of things you're interested in. You
Yeah.
can make suggestions,
Yeah.
and it will notify the assistant to bring items to you because you've either selected them during this digital experience inside of the change room. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's just an example of what these brands are experimenting with.
Yeah.
But that's where you've got to go in for that type of experience.
Yeah. And I guess to just kind of wrap up, sorry, I should have said that Matt had to go because he's got an important meeting.
Yeah.
He's got a critical meeting with a client. So unfortunately he had to go. But I think to wrap up and kind of bring it back to the kind of the crux of the thing, is it all leads back to that experimentation is great. The data is great. Design and experience is great. But if that doesn't connect to the quality of conversation in the boardroom about the importance of experience and the role that it plays in growth, revenue, retention, all of those factors, then it just becomes quite fragmented things that people do. To really bring it together, you've got to align the lot and have that conversation all the way through your organization, from shop floor to, to the chairperson. That's a chairman. Then I was going to get in trouble or get cancelled. Don't say that. So I think that's really important. So great. So we'll be back together to do the next episode soon. If you've got any questions or ideas or topics that you would like us to take on and discuss, if you'd like to be a guest on our podcast, we'd love to hear from you too.
Yeah.
But until next time, we'll see you on the next episode.
Good.